What skills do you have that he does not have?
Janet, thank you. Senator Markey, thank you, and thank you to everybody. I am heartbroken as to what we've seen on our streets and around our nation. I'm angry, and I'm grieving for our country. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, DJ Henry from Massachusetts. People are furious, and they have every right to be. We want peace, but there will be no peace without justice. And the fact is that for far too long, communities have been asked to share a burden of structures that they did not write. When the burden to fight has to be on those of us that actually wrote those policies to begin with. And so what we need now is folks that will stand up and fight back for them, stand side by side with them. And I promise, should I be elected your senator, I will be by their side every single step of the way.
Senator Markey, why are you better prepared than Congressman Kennedy?
My heart goes out to the Floyd family. No family should ever have to see one of their loved ones killed, murdered by a police officer in our country. It is absolutely unacceptable. It's not just our buildings which are on fire. It is the very soul of our country which is on fire right now. And that fire will not go out until we confront the systemic racism that is built into our society. When President Trump says he wants to make America great again, he does not. He wants to make America hate again. When President Trump says that when the looting starts, then the shooting starts. That's the kind of attitude which is leading to people all over our country to stand up, to fight for justice, to fight for the kind of country that they want. That's what I've done throughout my entire career. That's what I will do if I'm given the honor of returning to the United States Senate.
But Senator Markey, you're running against Congressman Kennedy. You're not running against Trump right now. Why are you better? Do you have better skills? Why are you better prepared to lead Massachusetts during these times of crisis?
I have led and delivered for the state of Massachusetts since I've been given the honor of serving. I have fought for the laws which would protect us against the climate crisis. I've been successful in doing that, ensuring that the fuel economy standards are there to reduce the greenhouse gases. That is a law. I have fought to make sure that I took on Wall Street so that there would be insider traders who would be made accountable. That is my law. I fought to make sure that there would be funding to find the cure for Alzheimer's by the year 2025. That is my law. I fought the NRA to make sure that I would be able, that people in our country would know that NRA would stand for not relevant anymore. And I have fought on this coronavirus crisis to make sure that the funding is there for our gig workers, for our fishermen, that the funding is there for ordinary citizens to get the unemployment insurance they need, to get the food which they need during this pandemic. I have led and delivered for the people of Massachusetts since the beginning of my career and throughout this coronavirus pandemic.
Congressman, he says, your senator says that he has more experience, therefore he should be reelected. Why do you think you have the skills to lead specifically on the racism issue?
Because we need stronger leadership in the Senate, Janet. This moment requires stronger presence, better judgment, and clearer vision than Senator Markey has delivered. And our nation at this moment is in crisis. 100,000 people have died, and over 40 million have lost their jobs. Cities around this nation are burning, and there are innocent black and brown lives being taken in our streets. Yet now there's talk to go back to normal. Our normal was broken. Normal was an essential worker who couldn't earn a living wage. Normal was healthcare that the sick couldn't afford. Normal was black and brown lives taken in our streets. We cannot afford to go back to normal. This moment calls for us to do something different, to build something better and bigger, and we will not do that with the same folks and the same mindset that have brought us the last 50 years. Because if there's a lesson from this crisis, it's that normal was broken.
Senator Markey, is the pandemic or racism the more immediate danger in your mind?
It is both at the same time. The coronavirus has unearthed, so all can see the racism in our society. It is those who are poorest, those who are considered to be essential workers, who are the ones who are suffering the most during this coronavirus. It is those who are more exposed to the environmental degradation, the pollution, which impacts their lives and makes them more vulnerable to the coronavirus. So we see it in the coronavirus, in those vulnerable families. We see it on the streets of our country, where black and brown voices are rising up saying we do not have justice in our society. We don't have environmental justice, we don't have social justice, we don't have economic justice, we don't have healthcare justice, we don't have educational justice, we do not have criminal justice. So both crises are unearthing this fundamental challenge to the soul of our country, that we see these people, that we hear them, and that we do something to give them the protections which they deserve.
Congressman, do you think that racism or the pandemic are the more immediate dangers?
I don't think you can separate the two, Janet. I think what we've seen is that, look, the virus does not discriminate on terms of who it infects. Yet we see by the data every single week, town by town, that it is at a far more devastating impact on communities of color. We've seen that in our hospital census about who's in those hospital beds. You see that you talk to any emergency room doctor, and they'll tell you they were seeing more black and brown people in those beds than anybody else. You hear a primal scream across our nation for people asking for justice, not just because of this moment, but because we see it exacerbated by this virus. And so trying to say you're going to combat one without the other, we have to combat both. And I believe our nation is strong enough to combat both. But I do not believe that we are going to be able to take on the challenges of our past and our history with the same folks that have been there for the last 50 years making these decisions.
Adrian Walker, our next question now for Congressman Kennedy.
Congressman Kennedy, do you believe the anger motivating peaceful protesters is the same emotion driving those responsible for looting and violence?
No. Well, let me rephrase that, Adrian. I think the anger that is motivating people at this moment is about literally centuries of injustice for folks that have been screaming out for justice now for literally centuries, and have still yet to get that hearing in Washington, D.C., and yet to get that hearing in the halls of power. And so I think we have to be very clear that windows may be broken, materials may be taken, but what that anger stems from is systemic injustice that has cost the lives of George Floyd, that has cost the lives of Breonna Taylor, and nothing will bring those lives back. And so I think I don't think you can separate the motivations of those folks that are protesting peacefully with those folks that are engaging in that looting. Let me be very clear about this. Our focus as a response cannot be those folks that are engaging in criminal activity, they will be tracked down, they will be prosecuted. Our focus has to be on what gave rise to that behavior to begin with.
Senator Markey, I'd like to ask you the same question.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. Yeah, the protesters who are out there are crying for justice. They're crying for justice. They see in George Floyd and his family, they see their own families. They see the injustice in our society. They see the harm which is being done in the name of the United States government, in the name of our society. And they want justice. That is who they are. When President Trump calls those protesters scum, he just shows what a racist he is. That's not who those protesters are. They're coming together to ask for there to be a change in this systemic discrimination, especially against those of color. I'm white, I'm male. I know I've been privileged. Black and brown families have always lived different lives in our country. And it's time for us to admit it and to do the job that is necessary in order to give them the justice they are crying for in our country.
Senator, thank you. WBUR's Bob Oakes now with our next question. Bob?
A question about the COVID-19 crisis and racial disparity. You've both tonight already addressed the link between health disparities and racial inequality. We see it happening in low-income neighborhoods like Roxbury and Mattapan in Boston and in the cities of Chelsea and Lawrence. But neither of you have told us yet about what the government should do about this. So why don't you address that? What should the government do to address health disparities and racial inequality? Senator Markey, you first.
Yeah, thank you. We have a big job on our hand. It's almost like an FDR moment. We have to respond to what we see. These essential workers are protecting our families right now, and it's our responsibility to protect their families. That's why it's imperative for us to guarantee that in our country we provide sick leave, we provide child care, we provide annual income. We provide the guarantees for those families. We give them access to the health care and the education which they need. That's why Senator Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders and I have introduced legislation to provide each individual in our country $2,000 a month throughout this pandemic, income that they can use in order to pay their bills, their rent, to pay for their mortgage, to pay for their prescription drugs, to pay for their food. We have to look at these families, look at who they are, and make sure that they get what they need from the federal government to make sure they have the help to make it through this pandemic.
Congressman Kennedy, the same question to you. What should the government do right now to address racial inequality and health disparities?
One, so you have to recognize the fact that these two things are obviously linked. And you then have to be intentional about how we're going to go about addressing them. That's why I've pushed with Ayanna Pressley to try to make sure, and Elizabeth Warren to make sure that HHS, our federal government, was actually releasing this data. I pushed on Governor Baker to make sure the state was releasing this data. I worked with folks like emergency room doctor and State Representative John Santiago to ensure that the ventilator guidelines, should someone get very sick and need life support, that the policies implemented were not going to be distorted based on long-standing racial inequities. We need to make sure that we do not continue to perpetuate these differences. More than that, you need to pass the Medicare Crisis Program Act, a bill that I authored with Pramila Jayapal, to ensure that every single person in this country gets access to the health care that they need when they need it, without any cost sharing with regards to treatment for coronavirus. Next, you need to make sure that we actually are intentional about addressing the root causes of much of this discrimination. Look, we've seen Chelsea, Springfield, the city with the highest rates of asthma in this country. There's a reason why when you overlap environmental justice communities with communities that have been most impacted by COVID-19, there's almost a direct correlation. We have to be intentional about addressing environmental justice, as I've done with Rahul Grijalva and a number of bills that I've authored.
Congressman Kennedy, right now here in Western Mass, 76 veterans have died from COVID-19 at the Holyoke Soldiers Home. It is one of the worst death counts at a nursing home in the country. More than 90 other veterans were infected. Should there be more federal oversight of state-operated veterans facilities like Holyoke, given the state's apparent failures there?
Yes. Dave, I was at the Soldiers Home around Veterans Day. I shook hands with some of those heroes. I talked to their loved ones. I heard their stories. They were serving ice cream and pie to celebrate the day. And the idea that from those hands that I shook back in November, that dozens of them might have passed because of this pandemic is unconscionable. So it's why I've filed legislation or proposed legislation to increase accountability, to increase prevention, and to ensure that there's going to be better standards put in place to ensure that something like this would never happen again. Not just for the Holyoke Soldiers Home, but for our nursing homes in general.
Senator Markey, same question. More federal oversight of state-operated veterans facilities?
Absolutely. Senator Warren and I have called for a GAO, Governmental Accountability Office, investigation of what happened in Holyoke, what happened in Chelsea, what happened all across this country in veterans facilities. These people served our country. They're seniors. The average age of death in Massachusetts during this coronavirus crisis is 82 years of age. 2/3 of the people who have passed away were in nursing homes. My mother passed away from Alzheimer's. I know what it must feel like for families not to be able to touch their loved one, kiss their loved one, even visit their loved one. So we have an obligation to protect them. Donald Trump in January had a chance to do something about it, but in January he was complacent. In February, he was careless. And for the rest of the time, he was criminally negligent, not providing the PPE, the testing, the equipment, the protections for those people in our veterans' homes. And he bears a very large, long-term historical burden for his dereliction of duty.
Now, that said, and you both touched on this, 62% of the deaths in the Commonwealth from COVID-19 were at those long-term care facilities. So how do you make sure they're prepared for a next time? Senator, your answer first.
Back in January, I called on Donald Trump on January 27th to name a coronavirus czar. He did not do so. I was the first senator to call for the president to deploy the Defense Production Act so that we would have massive protection of the personal protective equipment, of the testing, of all the resources that we would need to provide to nursing homes in our country. The president has still not invoked the Defense Production Act in order to accomplish that goal. So from my perspective, we have a responsibility in the Congress and in this country to provide those resources. I've filed legislation for $20 billion in order to make sure those resources get into our nursing homes and get there fast, so they'll have the equipment they need for the attendants and for those who they are taking care of, to be able to protect themselves and not spread the disease, but to protect the beloved family member who is under their care.
Congressman, same question for you. How do we keep this from happening again?
So you learn the lessons of this and you do something about it. One, the legislation that I proposed puts forward infection preventionists to ensure that if an infection like this does happen again, that there are the appropriate policies and procedures in place to ensure it actually does not spread. We also recognize the systemic challenges that our nursing facilities have. The legislation I've introduced calls for increased payments to those facilities so that they will have the resources, so you're not stacking people up on top of each other. You actually have the ability to take preventive measures and to provide the care that's necessary. We also need to provide better wages to our nursing home attendants and our healthcare employees. Look, the fact is that this is an extremely difficult job with extremely low pay. And one of the challenges we confront is to ensure that there is adequate staffing at these facilities so that we can ensure that our seniors get the high quality care that they need and they deserve. All of that is part of the legislation I propose, and that would go an awfully long way to ensuring that this doesn't happen again in our nursing facilities.
I want to talk about Congress's response to COVID-19. Congressman Kennedy, if you had been in the U.S. Senate this past few months, what would you have done to fight the COVID pandemic that Senator Markey failed to do? And I want you to be specific about this.
Janet, I think a number of things. So look, the issue here is not just the impact of COVID-19. And look, more, I called on with a number of colleagues, the activation of the Defense Production Act. We were the first ones in the country to do so. I called for a direct cash payment system months ago. All of those things are great. But the bigger piece here, Janet, is that you make sure that you have the structures put in place that a pandemic like this doesn't take root in our country to begin with. We know, it was shouted from the rooftops that this was a strategic threat to our country. We knew about the fact that this could have a disparate impact on communities of color and people with co-occurring conditions. We knew that. Yet our government, year after year, failed to prevent it. And so what I'm saying, you don't let it get this far. You make sure that you take on these challenges early and aggressively to make sure we don't have these inequities, to allow communities like Chelsea to face a rate of infection 5 times higher than the state average. You walk through Chelsea, you have a conversation with the folks running that community health center. They walked me through every step of the way as the challenges they would confront, and they were right on every single one of them, and still our system was unprepared.
Congressman Kennedy, are you saying that Senator Markey was not aggressive enough in dealing with his Senate colleagues? You don't have that problem now in the House. What makes you think that you can do better with Senator Mitch McConnell than Senator Markey?
Janet, I think this moment calls for better judgment, stronger presence, and stronger leadership than the senators exhibited. And look, it's not, after a pandemic reaches your shores, it's too late. I think we have led the pace in terms of our COVID response. We shut down our campaign early. We raised over $100,000 for local community groups. We've raised voices across our Commonwealth. We've done all that. But the big thing on this is you don't let it get there to begin with. You take on those challenges upstream so that you don't have to deal with thousands of people dying after it gets here. And there's much more that needs to be done.
Senator Markey, what's your response to the congressman?
Look, I'm from Malden. I take the response to this crisis very personally. I grew up in a blue-collar family. My father drove a truck for the Hood Mill Company. I still live in Malden in the same house I grew up in. I could see my mother and father at the kitchen table struggling to pay the bills every single week, every single month. And I can see millions of people across the state of Massachusetts right now struggling with those bills. They're facing a real crisis. That's why I fought successfully to add $300 million to the coronavirus package for the fishermen, those blue-collar workers in our state, and that money went in. That's why I fought to make sure there would be funding for 255,000 gig workers in our state. That money went in. That's why I fought for the funding for black, minority, women-owned small businesses, $60 billion, so they would have the funding for their small businesses so that they would survive. That money went into the bill. That's why I fought for food for each one of those families. That money went into the bill. That's why I fought for $900 million for low-income heating assistance for the families of Massachusetts. That
Senator,
money
time.
went into the bill. I fought, I won on each one of those measures. That's the kind of leadership that we need in the United States Senate. That's the kind of leadership which I provided.
But Senator, is there anything that you have not yet done that you can still do to convince the GOP to pass another relief package?
Mitch McConnell very clearly said, well, this is a blue state problem, not a red state problem. So we're going to have a monumental battle on the floor of the United States Senate, monumental, over this next month. We need at least $1 trillion that will go back to the states, the cities, the towns, so they don't have to lay off police, fire, teachers, schools. We have to make sure that unemployment insurance is stretched out to the rest of this year. And we have to make sure, as Senator Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders and I want to do, that we give $2,000 a month on a recurring basis until this pandemic is over to each and every individual in our country so that they can
Senator,
make it
time.
through this crisis.
Senator, thanks. All right, we're going to pick up the pace a bit with a speed round. These are short questions for both of you with mostly yes or no, no more than a one-sentence answer on a number of topics. Senator Markey, how would you grade Governor Charlie Baker's handling of the coronavirus outbreak, A through F?
Charlie Baker is working very hard on this crisis. He's been severely handicapped by the fact that Donald Trump did not provide the leadership at the national level to give us all the assistance which we needed.
A through F?
I'm not grading. He's working very hard. He's working under tremendous constraints. Donald Trump has let down this country and let down the state of Massachusetts.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you.
Congressman Kennedy, so
there
my
you go.
apologies.
I'd say at this point, incomplete, but when it comes to an issue like the Soldiers' Home, an F.
Congressman Kennedy, would you get on an MBA train or trolley car now or this summer?
With appropriate PPE and with assurances that it has been sanitized and cleaned, yes.
Senator Markey.
Absolutely. As long as we have all the safeguards in place, I would absolutely ride once again back on the T.
Senator Markey, if you take a day off this summer in the COVID era, what would you and your family do?
Well, hopefully we will have a chance just to go down to the beach, down to Revere Beach, and to be able to sit there as my mother and father did with my brothers and I when we were growing up. That would just be the most perfect day that we could have.
Congressman Kennedy?
As a dad with a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old who has been locked in an attic for the past 10 weeks and will be on the campaign trail very hard for the next couple months, whatever it is my wife wants me to do.
Good answer. Congressman Kennedy, your favorite place to visit in Western Mass, and when was the last time you were there?
Favorite place to visit is out in the Berkshires, and last time I was there was last summer, and it's been a beautiful place that my family has gone to from time to time, although I have to say, of late, not often enough.
Senator Markey.
Yeah, out in Lenox, when the music is playing and the temperatures are perfect, and you know that there's something just absolutely perfect in our life, and that's something that's absolutely enjoyable.
All right, thank you both. Jenna.
Congressman Kennedy, you recently stepped up your attacks on Senator Markey, accusing him of, quote, absent leadership, of not being in front of Massachusetts voters enough between elections. Considering your similar positions on most issues, is this your main reason for running against him?
Janet, as I said, I think this moment requires stronger leadership. And that means a stronger presence, yes. But it means better judgment and clearer vision. The challenges that we confront in this moment across our Commonwealth, whether that's responding to a novel virus or the burning that we are seeing and the anguish we are seeing across our streets and across our country. But the recognition that to try to get back to what that normal was, there were before COVID arrived, 500,000 people a night were going homeless in our country. 40 million were going hungry. There's not a single neighborhood in our country where a minimum wage worker working full-time could afford a 2-bedroom apartment. Half of the people suffering from mental illness cannot get access to the treatment that they need. And so I don't think you can confront those challenges and the challenges we face and say that we have done enough. And I think we can get an awful lot more out of this seat. There's far more to this than the votes you cast and the bills that you file, because Mitch McConnell doesn't care about that at all right now. This is so much bigger than the legislative responsibility in Washington, D.C.
Senator Markey, we don't see you around Springfield that often, nor do we see you in Massachusetts much between elections or before the pandemic. Can you explain why?
Well, that's just not true. Out here in Western Massachusetts, when Longmeadow needed the funding for the safety crossing to prevent further deaths, I was able to get the money in order to get that done. When East Hampton needed $800,000 for more firefighters, I went there. I delivered for them. When the hospitals, the leaders of Holyoke and Springfield said that they were hit by an opioid crisis, I had summits in Holyoke, summits in Springfield. And then after hearing them, I was able to pass 4 separate pieces of legislation: HIV, AIDS overlap with opioids, Suboxone distributed so that people would be able to get the medication which they needed, fentanyl protection, $65 million. All of it came out of the meetings in Springfield. All of it came out of the meetings in Holyoke. So not only do I hear people, but then I go to Washington, get the laws passed in order to protect the families of Springfield, of Holyoke, but of all of Massachusetts against the scourge of all of these problems which affects their families.
But there is a perception among a lot of Democrats that you are not here that often. So would you be willing to release your travel records since you became a senator in 2013?
My visits to Western Mass are so frequent that I now have 7 of the mayors in Western Massachusetts who have endorsed me, from Chicopee to Agawam to North Adams to Pittsfield. 7 mayors, state representatives, state senators, and the reason they have endorsed me is that I come to Western Massachusetts. I take care of the problems of the people of Massachusetts. I stand up and deliver for them. I have done so since the beginning of my career, and I will continue to do so in the future.
Congressman, I think you have a response.
Senator, look, I got in this race and I knew it was going to cause some ruffled feathers. I knew it was going to make folks uncomfortable. I had no desire, contrary to some out there, that would go create career suicide. When I called to folks in Western Massachusetts, I spoke to an elected official who said that they had seen me in Western Massachusetts more over the course of the past year than they had seen you. I was here twice. I don't think this state can afford absent leadership in the moment that we are in.
That is absolutely untrue. And if it was true, then all these mayors would not have endorsed me. I am there for them. I deliver for them. And that's why they are having my back during this election. And it doesn't really make any difference what the issue is. I have been there for them, even including, by the way, the people out in the Berkshires who could not see Channel 22 out of Springfield, and they wanted it out in the Berkshires. So I got that changed so that they can see this debate tonight if they want to. So from my perspective, no matter what the issue is, from Western Massachusetts or the Berkshires, I have delivered for these people. I have been there for them over
Senator, time.
and over and over again. And anything
Senator,
else
time.
is just plain and simple not true.
We can resolve this, Senator, if you release your travel records. Will you do that?
I will work with you, Janet, in order to get you the information which you want.
And I should mention to both of you, it would be nice if we had ABC 40 and CBS 3 in the Berkshires, too.
I agree with you 100%. I'll work with you on that.
All right. WBUR's Bob Oakes now with our next question.
Senator Markey, a question about age and experience. Younger Democrats who've successfully challenged longtime incumbents, especially in the last few cycles, have changed the expectation of voters by offering new ideas, new ways of solving long-standing problems. So what are you going to do in the next 6 years that you haven't done in the last 44 up on Capitol Hill?
Well, when I introduced the Green New Deal with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, it unleashed a young generation and all of their energy to work on the climate crisis. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has said quite clearly that Ed Markey is the generational change, which we are waiting for. And it's because on that issue of climate change, which is at the top of the list of concerns of young people, I have been the leader. Appliance efficiency standards, fuel economy standards for vehicles, the Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal has changed the debate in our country on the climate crisis on our planet. But more than that, I've also been the leader on net neutrality. I am the leader in the Senate on that. Young people care about this gun epidemic in our country. I am the leader on that in the Senate as well. And on social justice, equality, fighting for the rights of everyone in our society, I have led on the floor of the Senate on those issues as well.
Congressman Kennedy, you've admitted that Senator Markey has done a lot for Massachusetts. Your great uncle, the late Senator Ted Kennedy, spent 47 years in the Senate and was about the same age as Senator Markey when he last ran for office. Should Ted Kennedy have left earlier to make way for a younger perspective?
I think my uncle did a great job in the Senate. But this isn't about age and it's not about seniority. I'm one of Speaker Pelosi's strongest supporters in the House of Representatives. It's not about that. It's about meeting this moment and doing everything that you can possibly do to take it on. And Senator Markey's filed the Green New Deal. I support it. It's a good idea. It's a resolution that has not passed. What did pass? The Iraq War. And now a generation that was not born on 9/11 is overseas fighting our wars that have cost $6 trillion. We've got $1.7 trillion in student loan debt. Senator Markey passed the crime bill. That has led to a generation of incarceration for African-American men, expanded the death penalty, and quadrupled funding for prisons. Senator Markey voted for NAFTA. 4.5 million manufacturing jobs were wiped out, and no one knows that more than here in Western Massachusetts. So when we talk about the impact of a generation, when I visit schools for my preschools for my 4-year-old, I have to go through ask about an active shooter drill to make sure that she is going to be safe in school. So yes, I think it's time for a change.
Congressman, thank you. Adrian Walker now with a question for Congressman Kennedy.
I'd like to go back to the issue of race and equity. Congressman Kennedy, has the time arrived for America to begin making reparations to those citizens whose ancestors were kidnapped and brought to this country to work as slaves?
Yes, it has. Adrian, there's a bill, I believe it's H.R. 40, that has been filed in the House of Representatives. I support the legislation. It calls for a commission to come together and to study the appropriate way to actually do that. And look, I think the challenges that we are confronting are not going to be solved until there is an open and clear and honest discussion about the foundations upon which our society rests. Senator Markey and I work in a building that was built by slaves. The President of the United States, when he wrote those tweets in the most powerful office in the world, wrote them from a building built by slaves. I'm a white guy born into enormous privilege. I know that what comes with that is a certain station of life where you're not going to be able to wholly understand or comprehend the challenges that others confront. But that does mean that it is time, that far past time, for white Americans to actually help shoulder that burden, because these policies that the communities of color have been fighting against, they're not the ones that can convince people not to engage in racist behavior. It's white people that have to do that.
How do you think reparations should work?
I think, Adrian, I think the appropriate first step is to have a commission that comes together to actually address that. And whether there's a number of different ideas and proposals. There's a powerful House hearing about this about a year or so ago, which talked about various ideas, whether that was going to be grants for education or even small businesses or direct payments for folks that were descendants of slaves. All of those, there's complications with all of them. There's details there that need to be worked out. But we have to have this conversation, because to continue to deny the fact that the most powerful economy in the world was not built off of the appropriation of other bodies and labor is just a falsity.
Senator Markey, I'd like to ask you the same question.
Yeah. Senator Cory Booker has introduced a bill calling for a debate in our country, finally, on reparations. I am his original co-sponsor on that bill. It is time for us to have this discussion in our country about reparations, about what we owe to all of those who have been treated unjustly in our country, how they arrived in our country, and then how they were treated after they came here. I think we have to have that national debate. We have to have a discussion in our country as to what were the events that led to the conditions that we have right now. And by the way, George Floyd and his death, it raises a big question about that inequity. Right now, under our law, police officers have qualified immunity against being sued by the families of the victims or by the victim himself if the police have done something wrong to them. Cory Booker and I are introducing a resolution tomorrow in the United States Senate calling upon the Congress to change that law so that those police officers can be sued. And that's just one more example of what is wrong at the core of our country. It's a legacy of racism, a legacy of discrimination that we absolutely have to change.
Our next question tonight comes from a student at UMass Boston.
My name's Osagi Ihigi. I'm a student here at UMass Boston. I know you both support the Green New Deal, which is more than just about climate change. It also calls for better jobs, health care, and college education for all Americans. This is the progressive kitchen sink. My question to you is, should we just focus on climate change?
Senator Markey, your answer first, then Congressman Kennedy.
Climate change is huge, and as you're saying, when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and I introduced this bill, we said quite clearly the planet is running a fever, and there are no emergency rooms for planets, that we can solve the problem by deploying wind and solar, all-electric vehicles, new storage battery technologies, and that we had to do so. And that's what Alexandria and I did, by saying that it must deal with frontline communities first, that it has to deal with intersectionality, has to deal with the fact that minorities in our country, blacks and browns, have always breathed different air than whites in the suburbs. That's what the Green New Deal is all about. But in addition to that, we also have to make sure we deal with the debt burden of student loans. I was a commuter to college, a commuter to law school out of Malden. I know how big that debt is, and I know it's even bigger today. And we have to give the debt relief to those students in our country. We have to just solve this student debt problem that you are facing. And we also have to get at the core, again, that young people want us to do of this racism that's at the heart of our society. And I have been leading on those issues throughout the course of my career.
Congressman Kennedy.
I support the Green New Deal, and I was an original co-sponsor of it. I think it does create the framework and calls for the mobilization that is going to be necessary in order for us to achieve those goals. Now, here's where Senator Markey and I perhaps differ. One, we need the details to actually, the policies to actually flesh that out. I've authored legislation with one of the great environmental justice champions, Rahul Grijalva, and my own bill, the Voices for Environmental Justice, to actually help equip frontline communities push back against the siting of petrochemical and solid waste disposal factories. But regardless, The issue with implementing the Green New Deal is not actual policies. Senator Markey articulated some of them. It is a question of political will. And there is no chance you are going to act on either the resolution or the policies that the gentleman articulated or the Senator Markey articulated, unless you change the power dynamics in Washington, which is why I went out and helped flip the House. It was why I was in nearly 20 states last cycle campaigning for other candidates. And it's why we need to do that and take on things like dark money in politics and the filibuster, because you will not pass progressive policies without them. It just ain't gonna happen. And we need senators that understand that framework and are going to fight against it.
All right, Adrian Walker now with a question for Congressman Kennedy.
I have a question about transportation in Western Massachusetts. Congressman Kennedy, if someone lived in Springfield and wanted to work in Boston and take the train, the only option is a 6 a.m. train that goes through Connecticut and takes nearly 6 hours. Do you support increasing train service between Boston and Western Massachusetts? And is high-speed rail, so long promised, still a priority?
Yes, yes, and yes. Adrian, we have to actually make East-West Rail a reality, and if I am elected your senator, I will make it one. Because this comes down to a question of priorities, and we can no longer continue to focus on economic development solely based on Boston. And I can speak to this because I currently represent communities like Taunton and Fall River, communities that have consistently been promised that linkage through South Coast Rail, communities that for far too often have been left as neglected from the resource dollars that flow in. So we've helped put together a regional economic development strategy in southeastern Massachusetts, modeled after what was done in the Knowledge Corridor here out in Springfield. But it requires, and the long-term development requires these structural investments. We cannot continue to neglect cities outside of Boston. And so yes, it will be a priority of mine should I be elected senator.
Senator Markey, you have a $25 billion bill to expand state and national train service. Would that include more routes to address this problem?
Absolutely. My legislation is the brain train legislation, and it's intended to connect Pittsfield and Springfield and the West into the eastern part of our state and into other parts of New England. It's to guarantee that this innovation economy, which we have in Massachusetts, we're not just the Bay State, we're the brain state, is something that everyone in our state can take advantage of. So yes, my brain train legislation, which Richie Neal is the House co-sponsor of, is intended to spend $5 billion a year for 5 years, $25 billion. And it's not just for East-West Rail, it's also for South Coast Rail. Down in the South Coast, in the Bedford and Fall River, they are two cities within 50 miles of Boston, not connected. It's also out in the Berkshires, the Housatonic, down into New York City so that they can benefit from our economy. So I'm the leader on that issue. I've introduced that legislation. I serve on the Infrastructure Committee, and we are going to have a debate on infrastructure in this country, and at the center of it is going to be rail passenger service for Western Massachusetts, but for all of our state, so they can enjoy all of the benefits of this brain economy, this innovation economy, which is Massachusetts.
Okay, we're going to change things up again with another speed round. Remember, these are very short questions, and so we would appreciate very short answers, no more than a sentence. Congressman Kennedy, would you ever run for president of the United States?
No plans, none.
So you never would run, or you
I have never, Janet, I got focused on September 1st, and then hopefully after that, November 3rd, and then trying to recover from a hard-fought campaign. No plans, not on the horizon, no plans whatsoever.
Senator?
I am not going to run for president. I want to maintain my unique status in the Senate of being the only person in the Senate not running for president of the United States. And I've been good at maintaining that thus far, and I intend on maintaining it.
Senator Markey, would you recommend that Vice President Biden choose as his vice presidential candidate? Who would you recommend?
Well, obviously, I endorsed Elizabeth Warren for president of the United States, and she would be an absolutely fabulous vice president. But Vice President Biden is obviously going to make up his own mind, and there are many good candidates, but at the top of the list, I would actually put Elizabeth Warren.
Congressman Kennedy, if there was one person that you're going to name, who would that be?
Ed Markey. And if not, Senator Markey, Elizabeth Warren.
Okay. Congressman, What's your worst personality trait, or what does your wife think is your worst trait?
Those are going to be two very different things. Look, I think this is more information than you need. My wife does not like it when does not like being anywhere near my feet. So feet on the couch is like the big thing that drives her nuts.
How about you, Senator Markey? What's your wife think is your worst habit, or what do you think is your worst trait?
My wife cannot believe how obsessed I am with the Red Sox, the Patriots, the Bruins, and the Celtics. She thinks it's a pathology. I tell her that we're genetically hardwired in Massachusetts. You're born a Democrat and a Red Sox fan, then you're baptized 7 days later. So it's just part of me, and she can't believe the amount of time I spend focusing on those four teams.
Senator, when was the last time you attended church as a congregant? In other words, we're not going to a funeral or a wedding. Senator. Did you hear me?
Oh, yes. Well, again, I'm both religious. My wife is Jewish. I married the dream. I married a Jewish doctor. And so between my wife's religion and mine, Catholicism, going up to the Immaculate Conception Church in Malden and just sitting in the back of the church.
When was the last time you were there?
Well, I actually, last week, wearing a face mask, I actually went up outside of the Immaculate and stood there for a half an hour and prayed. And so it's just last week that I went up to the Immaculate Conception Church, and it was a shame that, again, it wasn't open, but it's been a part of me because I went to the Immaculate Conception Grammar School, Boston College, Malden Catholic, and so I had a choice of taking the bar exam or getting ordained, and so just last week.
Congressman Kennedy, when was the last time you attended church as a congregant?
Grateful for the absolution that's been given by the Pope to not attend over the course of the past several weeks, but it would have been a couple of months before COVID-19 happened.
And Congressman, tell us one good quality about your opponent.
Senator Markey is a good and decent man, without question, and has spent his life in service to our country, and I respect that.
Senator Markey?
Last May, I went to Congressman Kennedy, and I said I have a piece of legislation, a gay, trans, panic defense bill that we should both co-sponsor. I'd love you to be my House co-sponsor so that we can fight for that community to make sure that a crazy defense, the panic defense, isn't used in order to inoculate people against doing harm to the gay and trans community. And he and I partnered on that, and I thank him for that.
Okay, this is going to be the toughest question that I'm asked tonight. Senator Markey, one word to describe Tom Brady. One word.
Infallible.
And Congressman, your one word?
Goat.
And now, Tampa Bay. Thank you both. Our next question comes from a student at UMass in Amherst.
Student debt forgiveness is an important issue for myself and my fellow classmates. We were wondering, do you support a plan that forgives student debt? And if so, who would qualify for that? And is there a financial cutoff?
Senator Markey, your answer first.
As I said earlier, I graduated from college and law school with a lot of student debt. In fact, so much that I was actually 6 years in Congress and still paying those student loans back. So I feel what you feel today. I lived it. And so from my perspective, inside of this pandemic bill, the next one coming up, I want $10,000 across the board forgiveness for anyone in our country that has that kind of debt. We should just help those young people right now with that kind of forgiveness. But I also believe that going forward, especially for those who come from families that are more blue collar, more working class, that we need a plan here that could forgive upwards of $100,000 worth of student debt. I just think that it's unconscionable that we ask young people to shoulder that kind of burden. And I lived it, I understand it, and I will fight for that.
Congressman Kennedy.
Yes. And that's why I've co-sponsored a bill that eradicates 95% of all student loan debt. And the reason why it's not 100 is that families like mine, ma'am, I don't think You and other taxpayers should be paying for my children's education. For families that can afford it, they should be able to pay for it. Now, I think what's critically important here, and the reason the value underlying this, is that throughout American history, up until recently, we guaranteed a pathway to a middle-class job and the education and skills required in order to meet it. And that was, for a long time, a high school diploma. It's obviously no longer a high school diploma anymore. But we have, instead of telling everyone that we as a society will share that burden with you, we've put that burden on American families and students to the tune of $1.7 trillion. It is unconscionable and an economic burden that no family in American history has ever had to bear before, which is why millennials have, by every stretch, have the worst economic outcome or outlook of any generation in American history. We had the worst job prospects 10 years ago when you hit a recession, the likes of which we weren't supposed to see until we hit this one. We need to do better for our younger people.
All right, Bob Oakes with our next question. Bob.
Thanks, Dave. We're very tight on time, gentlemen, so very snappy answers to this question, please. The COVID-19 crisis has many people arguing it's time for Medicare for all. You've both supported it. Joe Biden and now Senator Elizabeth Warren, though, are both for expanding the Affordable Care Act to include a Medicare-like public option instead of Medicare for all. Congressman Kennedy, are Biden and Warren wrong? And how do you get a reluctant Congress to go along with Medicare for all? No filibuster on the answer, please.
This country needs to ensure that every single person gets access to the health care that they need when they need it. That's why I support Medicare for all. If there has to be a step to get there, fine. But the underlying issue here is we have to do more to ensure that every single person gets access to the health care that we need. That is the promise of Medicare for all. That is why I support Medicare for all, and I've been a proud supporter of Medicare for all.
So Biden and Warren are wrong?
Yeah, I think you need Medicare for all.
All right, Senator Markey, same question. Are Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren wrong? And how do you get Congress to go for Medicare for all?
Well, like the Green New Deal, I have been an original co-sponsor of Medicare for all. I stood next to Bernie Sanders when he introduced it into the United States Senate. We've already seen 27 million Americans lose their health insurance in the last 2 months, on top of the 30 million who already did not have health insurance in our country. If we're going to come out of this crisis, we have to ensure that it's not just a privilege, but a right for every American to have health insurance. That's what Medicare for all is. Medicare for all is the guarantee that everyone would get it, and I believe that we must make that the top of the line first issue that we are taking up next year in the Senate, and I'm going to fight every single step of the way with Bernie Sanders and whoever else wants to be an ally in order to put that law on the books. It's the only way to guarantee everyone gets the health insurance they need.
All right, so Biden and Warren are wrong.
I think what Elizabeth said is that the public option should be the interim step for 2 years and then move on to Medicare for all. And perhaps that's what it will take. But ultimately, the goal has to be Medicare for all, for everyone. No premiums, no deductibles, no nothing. Just move on to a new system that gives people the guarantee that they know for the safety and security of their family that they have the health care, which is something that they can depend upon.
All right, for both of you, 15-second answers if we could. Your last political mistake, and what did you learn from it, and how did it change you? Congressman Kennedy.
Oh, boy. In 15 seconds, I'm not sure what the last one was. I hope I learned about it. There's mistakes I make literally every single day. I'll come back to you and figure that one out.
Senator
There's
Markey.
plenty of them.
Senator Markey.
Well, my last mistake was thinking that Lindsey Graham would stand up for comprehensive immigration reform so that we would have the DACA, the TPS, to have all 11 million immigrants in our country who would be eligible. And it just turns out that that was a mistake. He is not going to take that position. He's going to side with Donald Trump, and I just think that's wrong and a great disappointment.
All right, Senator and Congressman, this is all the time we have for questions. Time for our closing statements. Each candidate gets 45 seconds. A coin toss determined that Congressman Kennedy will go first. Congressman?
Thank you, Dave. I'm running because you deserve more out of your senator. This moment, we are at a breaking point, but we will not fail. This is a chance to build something better. It's going to be the work of a generation, and I am all in. Massachusetts is my home. It's where I'm raising my family. And I promise I will be by your side every single day to make sure the next 50 years are better than the last. Together, we can address the policies that hurt us, that take Black and brown lives in our streets, that failed our heroes in Holyoke, that have left behind our poor, our old, and our sick, and that neglect communities in Fall River, in Springfield, and in Lawrence. This is the moment we have. We will not fail, and I humbly ask for your vote.
Senator Markey.
Our country is in crisis. Our streets are on fire. The soul of our country is in jeopardy. I have provided leadership on the floor of the Senate, creating an unparalleled record of fighting on all the key issues that the people of Massachusetts care about. I will fight on the floor of the Senate to ensure that we pass Medicare for all. I will fight to make sure that we pass a Green New Deal. I will fight to make sure that we eradicate the racism that's at the heart of our society that we're seeing all across our country right now. I believe we have a chance for a better, brighter future for our country. And I want to join with everyone who's watching tonight in order to fight for the very soul of our society.
Our thanks to our candidates tonight, Senator Edward Markey and Congressman Joseph Kennedy, for taking the time to be with us. I'm Dave Batson. Thank you for watching. Stay well and have a good night.
Solar, offshore wind. It will only be through an historic, generational commitment to end climate change that we create the kind of democracy that works for all Americans. Never in our history have the interests of all Americans been so united. I want to thank my fantastic partner, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. We will save all of creation. Our energy future will not be found in the dark of a mine, but in the light of the sun, of the sun, of the sun.